Am I the butthole for pranking this kid by waving at him with a severed arm and telling him it was his mom's? Is that a real question? You want to hear a story about grave robbing, angry mobs, and how the reputation of every doctor in the 18th century was ruined by one guy who thought he was just really funny? Grab a drink, grab a snack, and let me tell you about the Doctors' Riot of 1788. It's fun, I swear. So one day in April of 1788, a couple of kids were playing outside, right by a window looking into City Hospital's dissection room. John Hicks, a student at the time, just so happened to be there working on a human arm. I can imagine these kids pressing their faces against the window glass to try and see what this guy was doing. And eventually, when Hicks noticed them, he did what, honestly, I'm pretty sure most of us would have done. He waved at the boys with the severed arm. But then, having done something silly, Hicks was struck by a terrible affliction. The audacity. To be honest, we're really not sure the full context of what happened next. But the one absolute truth in this story is that Hicks decided to double down and tell one of the kids that the arm belonged to the kid's mom. Now, the real question is, did Hicks know this kid, or was this just a real bad shoving his foot in the mouth situation? Because as it turns out, the kid's mom had in fact just died. So of course the kid runs home and he tells his dad what happened. Dad gets understandably upset and pulls the boss move of exhuming his wife's grave. Guess what's not in the coffin? Whoops. This awesome prank, bruh, was about to end with violence. Turns out grave robbing was a real problem in the Americas, carried over from England with its physicians. For pretty much forever, there's been a long-standing debate on whether dissecting pre-owned bodies was morally acceptable. On the one hand, criminals could be convicted and sentenced to death and dissection because there's no worse punishment than being torn open by medical students. And you know what? Surprising to me, this actually included men and women. See, apparently we mattered at one point in medical history. And of course, on the other hand, dissection itself was the crime. From the 3rd century until the Middle Ages, everything was peachy keen. Anatomical study was seen as the best way to learn about the human body. We get into the Middle Ages and it's a giant mess of holy wars, bloodshed, and then you get into people stealing body parts from those killed during the holy wars to use as relics, and they just decided the whole thing was bad news. And of course, for that time period, you had the fears that the soul would not move on to the afterlife if the physical body was not intact. It was actually 1700 years before actual statutes were put into place to regulate when and how a body should be studied. Some places declared that a dissection would take place once every 5 years and all medical students were mandated to attend. Others opted for holding an annual or biannual 4-day exhibition, usually in the colder months of the year. Why was it 4 days? Well, studying human anatomy required fresh materials, so 4 days was about as long as you could get away before the stench became unbearable. In other cases, families were actually offered free funeral services if they would be willing to donate their loved ones' bodies to the students to study. Afterward, the students would also be required to attend the services for the deceased. Which honestly, I don't think that's a bad deal. Eventually, there were actual laws enacted to support people donating bodies for science, but even with criminals and volunteers, there were not enough bodies. Every time there's a market shortage, there's gonna be somebody with just the solution. Enter the resurrectionists, which is actually a pretty cool name for a really crappy, low-grade evil kind of job. Actually, do you know what's really funny? Or at least I think it's really funny. Stealing a body wasn't a crime. It was like a misdemeanor at best. The actual issue was stealing the belongings of the dead. So clothes, jewelry, other items that might have been buried as well. But the actual body, fair game. And trust me, these guys were good at their job. Some would use grave dirt as a counterweight at the foot of the coffin to pop open the head of the coffin and then reach in with a hook or a rope to extract the body. They would also put tarps on the ground in which to place the displaced grave dirt. This way, when they put everything back where it was supposed to be, the surrounding ground wouldn't look disturbed at all. Once iron coffins and wart safes came into play, they would actually tunnel yards away from their target and burrow their way towards their mark to extract it underground. This way, if there were mourners, friends, watchmen keeping an eye on the body, they wouldn't see a thing. Occasionally, the resurrection men would also hire women to attend funeral services posing as mourners to kind of assess the state of a body and discover anything that may render the victim useless. Because if the body can't be used, you don't get paid. Besides, if you want to snatch a body, you've got a real tight window there. Like I said, 4 days. Women also infiltrated poorhouses, posing as grieving relatives to claim bodies. And of course, you've also got the enterprising creeps who decided to liberate souls from their pre-owned vessels, thus providing fresh material for the market. By far, the vast majority of people who were victims of grave robbing were the impoverished, the mentally ill, the disabled, and people of color. You know, the people that resurrection men would claim wouldn't be missed. It left the potter's fields ransacked, and of course, those who were privileged enough paid to have their loved ones protected. This kind of paints the picture that doctors are bloodthirsty monsters, when in reality, a majority of students also felt that this was morally reprehensible, which, yeah, very not okay. And now we circled back to Johnny Boy and just how bad he messed up. You see, the kid's father, understandably pissed, formed a mob. Yeah, like the pitchforks and torches kind. Because it turns out that people don't love it when you kidnap their deceased. And like I said, whether Hicks knew this kid and just felt like being a jerk, or if it was actually even the kid's mother's arm, is unclear. I mean, like, my gut says that he knew the kid's mom had died, because why would you willingly bring down the wrath of 2,000 angry men? So the mob storms the hospital, and guess what they found? No, it wasn't an ice cream party. There were more bodies. And that made them even angrier. I mean, like, what? Did they check every room? Were the bodies just like spread out on the floor like a nightmare from Silent Hill? Regardless, the mob destroyed everything. Students, doctors, and assistants were dragged into the street to be beaten. And it got so bad, the mayor of New York, James Duane, had to have the students and doctors escorted to the jailhouse for their own protection. And if you think the jailhouse was able to quell the mob, you would be incorrect, because they tried to storm the jailhouse too. Those who weren't imprisoned fled and hid. And Hicks, he got his very own search party sent on hunting him down because, frankly, this was all his fault. In the end, 3 of the rioters and 3 of the militiamen lost their lives, although some accounts report up to 20 casualties. As I'm sure you can imagine at this point, doctors didn't really inspire the warm and fuzzies in people, and it took a very long time for them to regain the trust of the people. There were some students who were put on trial because of the condition some of the bodies were found in. But do you know who never went to trial? John Hicks. In fact, he continued to be an absolute menace. If we cut to August of 1797, a bag of body parts was found just floating down the river. They eventually traced the bag back to Hicks, who kind of just shrugged and said, well, the man was hanged for murder, and according to your laws, he was fair game. And that they dissected him in the most decent and secret way. What does that even mean? First of all, you are working in an operating theater. There are no secrets in the operating theater. And dude, they find a floating bag of body parts and your response is, sorry bro, guess I forgot to weigh it down. And somehow, despite 2 anatomical scandals, John Hicks managed to become a reputable doctor. And you know why? I'll tell you why. He was rich, and we all know that you can get away with anything if you have enough money. John Hicks died during the yellow fever epidemic, and really my only regret is not getting to know what his 3rd medical scandal would have been, because once you have one every 10 years, that's a pattern if I've ever heard of one. Thanks for hanging out with me today. I really appreciate you all. And if there's a lesson to be had at this story, it's probably don't make ya mama jokes at 18th century children. If you like weird medical history and you'd like to hear about that one time this guy killed 3 people during a one-person surgery, you can check out this video right up here. Happy Halloween, and I will see you guys in the next one.